Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Episode 147. Who Watches the Watchers?
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Ken Ray. Each week on Mission Log...
Who's there? Who's there? A voice in my head, yet there is no one I can see.
It's me. I'm on the microphone. You're wearing headphones. We're talking...
What magic is this? Who's there?
It's not magic. I'm Ken, and we're doing a show together like we do every week.
Okay, the Ken. If I do a good job, will you look favorably upon me and make the winters mild and the rains fall?
Well, you do live in California, so one of those is guaranteed. The other one, I'm going to say yeah. I'm liking where this is going, so yes, the Ken.
No, cut the bit. Stop the bit. The bit is over.
Oh, man. That's too bad, because I thought I had a shot here at something really incredible, but...
Hope you enjoyed it while it lasted.
That was kind of fun. It was kind of fun. So let me go ahead and say, by the way, for people who are not, freaked out by the magic of my voice, each week on Mission Log, we take apart an episode of Star Trek. We do this whole thing where we do messages, morals, and meanings, and we try to figure out whether that whole thing about which I spoke just a moment ago sticks together, holds up, stands the test of time, if you will. And I guess we want to hear from people, right? If it does, in their minds as well. Do we want to this week, though? Do we want to do this week, really?
We do, but we do want to tell people that today's episode is Who Watches the Watchers?
Oh, yeah. This is the one where Dr. Manhattan shows up. And he's all like, I'm magic, and Rorschach is there, and he's all like, that's the Watchmen. That's a totally different thing. We may need to postpone. I'm assuming you're going to tell the story, though, so maybe I'll just pick up from that. Hey, before you tell the story, you have to do trivia. But before you do trivia, I feel like I need to let people know how they can get in touch with us. Like I said a moment ago, Mission Log Pod is the address to find us on Facebook, Skype, and Twitter. That handle again is Mission Log Pod. If you would like to leave us a voicemail, there is one way to do that. Give us a call, 323-522-5641. That number again, 323-522-5641. Our email address is missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our shore website, including discovered documents and all kinds of fun stuff, is at missionlogpodcast.com. Remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log. Let's see how it goes.
All right, Ken. Well, today I do have some trivia for you. Today's episode is written by Richard Manning and Hans Bemmler. It was directed by Robert Wiemer, and he had done just a handful of films and TV before coming to this. It's his first episode of Star Trek, but he'll be around for a few more. Now, we'll get into the subject matter in a bit, but it's interesting to note early on here that Bemmler expected there to be some negative reaction to this story, and so did Gene Roddenberry. And there really wasn't. Gene understood the Mintakans this way, and I quote, "I've always thought that if we did not have supernatural explanations for all the things that we might not understand right away, this is the way we would be, like the people on that planet." Now, Gene chalked up the lack of response to the audience and the distribution that Next Gen had found. And I quote again, "It is a source of considerable amusement to me that we can do shows like this and on various other subjects, large and small, and get little to no public reaction. If these things were done on Broadway or in motion pictures, they would have stunned audiences."
If they had had a network behind them, or if they had had to answer to a network, same goes.
Right. Well, that's a big part of it. The distribution, of course. They were first run syndication. So, they didn't really have a lot of blowback in that respect to expect. But then you also have the Star Trek audience.
Right.
So, and that Star Trek audience may have already just sort of been tuned into what they were doing and didn't bother to write in. Now, Ken, how's your Latin?
Terrible. How's yours?
Awful.
All right.
But I do have a phrase here which I will butcher. Quis custodiet ipsos custores, which means who will guard.
Your Latin really is bad, dude.
It is pretty bad. Who will guard the guards themselves? That is the original phrase that this comes from. And that is from a poem, The Satires, by the 1st century AD Roman poet Juvenal. Now, originally in context, it was pointed at marital fidelity, but later has been adopted as a question pointed to any institution or individual in power over another. See also Who Watches the Watchmen, as we referenced earlier in today's show. Ken, we welcome back an old friend, the Vasquez Rocks.
So happy to be there.
Yeah.
So happy to be there. If I ever make it back to Southern California, if I ever get out to Southern California, if I ever go there again, I do hope somebody will drop me by the Vasquez Rocks.
That would be nice.
It would be nice of anybody who was around if I ever get back to Southern California.
Yeah, good luck.
Thanks.
Now, we have some guest stars worth mentioning, of course. We have Catherine Lee Scott playing Nuria. She was a regular in the original Dark Shadows, appearing in over 300 episodes. She even had a cameo in the Tim Burton movie version, and she has a lot of other TV and voice credits to her name. Now, Pamela Adlon, in this labeled as Pamela Seagull. So Pamela Adlon Seagull played OG, and I absolutely love Pamela Adlon. She started out with a recurring role on The Facts of Life. That's for you, Ken.
I did not remember that. I do not remember that, but I have to go check it out now.
Oh, yeah. Well, you've got the whole DVD box set.
That is not true. I don't even know why you're talking about Facts of Life with me. That's not true.
Okay.
Family Ties, Mad About You, Moonlighting. Used to be I Spy, but I'm having a hard time watching those now.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, so she was on that. She appeared in a ton of TV shows and also did a lot of voice work for everything from Rugrats to Thundercats to King of the Hill. More recently, she has been a regular on Louie with Louis C.K., and she was Marcy on Californication, in which she was hilarious and outrageous. And truly, if you have not heard them, her DVD commentary tracks for that show are awesome.
Can I do one thing really quickly?
Yeah, please.
She's Bobby on King of the Hill.
She is.
She's Bobby. I mean, just so, I mean, like when you say, oh, well, you know, she did a voice on King of the Hill, she's Bobby.
Yeah.
Which may make it difficult for you to go back and watch this show now because you might start hearing Bobby. I will say, though, if you're watching Louie and you close your eyes, it's much more difficult.
Yeah.
Because she sounds so much more like Bobby on Louie than she does on the Next Gen.
Now, James Green plays Dr. Barron. Many guest starring roles, including a regular gig on Parks and Rec and Alien Nation, and he'll be back in later Star Trek. And finally, Ray Wise, the great, unstoppable Ray Wise. He is here as Liko, and the guy is just constantly working. Now, recently, you've seen him in Mad Men, How I Met Your Mother, 24, and the sadly overlooked Kroll Show from Comedy Central, and in just so many other shows and movies. Now, the most famous for fans of cult TV, however, has got to be his starring role as Leland Palmer on Twin Peaks. Pretty much if you turn on a movie or a TV show and you look for the tan and the bright white smile, if it's not George Hamilton, it's probably Ray Wise.
Federation scientists are really good at playing hide and seek. Right up until they are not.
Prologue. On a planet called Mintaka 3, there's a group of humanoids, kind of Vulcan-like, we'll call them Proto-Vulcans, who are in the equivalent of their Bronze Age. There's also a very small scientific outpost, hidden in a holographically camouflaged duck blind. The scientists who are there to very quietly and without being detected at all observe them are on the verge of screwing all of that up. It's not their fault. They need supplies, and just as the Enterprise is about to deliver, their reactor goes kablooey. The duck blind is now very obvious to ducks, proto-Vulcans, and anyone else with eyes. Act 1. In the not-so-hidden lab on Mintaka 3, an away team beams down to find a pretty bad scene. Equipment and scientists are just a mess all around. The away team goes about cleaning up, restoring power, and beaming up at least one of the injured scientists to the Enterprise. The bad news is, one of the Mintakans, one of those Bronze Age proto-Vulcans, this one named Liko, just saw the whole thing. He accidentally touches a live power circuit and falls down from the duck blind where his daughter, OG, finds him. Dr. Crusher rushes to help, beaming Liko up too, and oops, OG just saw that. In sickbay, we've got, two scientists and one Liko who does not belong. Picard wonders why Dr. Crusher didn't just let him die, but the injury was their fault. Liko wakes up from his injury long enough to see Picard in sickbay, reassuring one of the injured scientists that he will find one of the others, Palmer, and everything will be all right. But it's not quite like that. Picard is all glowy in the warm light of the lab. He just oozes command in a kind of angelic way. Crusher knocks Liko unconscious to heal his injuries, and, not to worry, she'll pull a Dr. Pulaski and erase his recent memory. Problem solved. Liko is beamed back down to the spot where he was hurt, but problem not solved. He remembers everything about being on the Enterprise. He tells OG that he met a god, the Picard, who, like the old superstitions told, had infinite power, can heal the sick, and raise the dead. Act 2. Recap in the conference room. One scientist, Baron, is stable, but the other, Warren, is critical. Palmer is still missing somewhere on Mintaka 3, and that place is just crawling with Mintakans who really should not know anything else about spaceships, holograms, and humans. Riker has a cunning plan. He and Troy will pull a James Bond and Kissy Suzuki maneuver, blending themselves in as locals to search for Palmer. Riker and Troy make their way into the bustling Mintakan community, where Liko is telling the story of his miraculous recovery to some of the town leaders, Finto and Nuria. Troy blurts out, it was a dream. Too bad Picard's not real. OG pipes up that she just saw what happened to Liko. Yeah, that's cool, kid. You had the same dream, okay? All done here? About that time, two Mintakans dragging a badly injured and unconscious Palmer. Liko says that's who Picard was looking for, ergo the Picard god is real. Riker calls up to his captain, informing him of his new rank. Act 3. Picard knows he can't just beam Palmer out of there to the Enterprise. It would compound the contamination that has already happened on Mintaka 3. With Palmer captured, and assuming that the Picard will be looking for him, Liko suggests they tie him up. Riker interjects, "Come on, guys, that hardly seems necessary. You don't even know for sure there is a Picard." The Mintakans just logic their way into why they need to hang on to Palmer. By keeping him, the Picard will grant them favors. Troy creates a diversion by saying that she saw another person hanging out by the caves. That clears the room enough that Riker can tie up Finto and walk off with Palmer in order to beam him up to the Enterprise. As bad luck would have it, though, OG has turned back. She, the curious scientific type with sundial duties, and she sees Riker struggling to carry Palmer. She calls out to him, but Riker is just able to hide himself among the rocky landscape to beam back up with Palmer. He may be safe, but Troy is still on the planet below, and all attention is turned to her. She insists that Riker set Palmer free because they do not believe in the ancient superstitions. Liko considers that for a second, but posits a new idea. They should probably punish Troy to make sure the all-powerful Picard doesn't punish them for letting Palmer escape. Things are also getting tricky in the conference room of the Enterprise. Baron is giving Picard an earful about how the Mintakans may act violently toward Troy unless the Picard makes an appearance and does god things to make them back off. They have no idea how to interpret what he wants, and they'll keep stabbing in the dark, literally, to find out. Picard flatly refuses. He will not further contaminate what was once a rational, peaceful society by playing into their superstitious fantasy. But if the Mintakans think Picard is a god, Picard is willing to dispel the magic and show their leader, Nuria, how it's actually done. With Troy's help, Riker and Data are able to identify which life sign is Nuria and lock in on her coordinates. Picard goes to the transporter room to personally beam her up, and Nuria reacts exactly how anyone meeting Patrick Stewart should. She falls to the floor, groveling before her idol. Act 4. Nuria is in awe of Picard. And who wouldn't be? But he says, "Look, I'm just a guy. Stop with the worshipping. Now let me show you around my ship." In the conference room, Nuria sees her planet from space. Picard tries to explain that the Enterprise is a machine. He's just a living being, and like the living beings on her planet, humans had to progress technologically. They went from caves to huts to houses to condos with waterfront views and a doorman. Nuria is starting to get it. Picard isn't magic at all. Now, if he can just do one last favor and bring back the dead for her... Wait, what? Down below, Storm is brewing on Mintaka 3, and the people are assuming this is a signal from an angry Picard. What to do? Well, the only logical thing that would keep the Picard happy: sacrifice Troy. Act 5. In sickbay, the other scientist, Warren, is not doing well at all. Picard and Nuria enter just as she is dying, and Nuria finally clues in. Picard and the rest of his people are not gods with power over life and death. She wants her people to understand this too. The two beam back down to Mintaka 3, and not a moment too soon, as Liko has drawn his bow with an arrow pointed directly at Troy. Picard steps in, and Liko starts to grovel. Nuria tries so hard to get him to wise up, but he won't. Liko is convinced that Picard can bring his wife back from the dead, and when Picard refuses, Liko pulls his bow again. Fine. Picard says that if he is a god, then the arrow won't hurt him at all. But if he is a man, then Liko would have killed him. Oh, is that all? Liko fires, but only just as OG pushes him. The arrow hits Picard on the shoulder, and blood is spilled. Liko is beside himself, but it's only a flesh wound. Picard is beamed up, repaired by Dr. Crusher, and comes back down to say goodbye. The Mintakans understand that everything that happened was an accident, that the scientists were just there to observe. But hey, could we have some of your knowledge and cool technology before you go? Picard says no. The most important law to his people is non-interference. So everybody watch him beam up and fly off in his giant spaceship. The end.
I give it 50 to 100 years before it's back to being a religion.
You really? Wow. Yeah, that's...
Yeah, we separate. Here's what I thought of. George Washington never told a lie.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and we know that's true because we were all told that from the time we were kids. And why were we told that? That part I can't help you with. I give it like 50, maybe 75, maybe 100 years before they're like, yeah. And so the Picard came down and said, though I am like you, I am not of you. So do what I say, and we'll be cool.
So
I'm skipping to the end. I apologize. No, I'm not necessarily right. Hey, anything could happen, man. Anything could happen. You got little Bobby Hill down there, so she's going to remember, for a while. So she can at least tell for as long as she's alive. And past that, I'm going to
throw out all the notes that I took, because now I'm just thinking that with the way that people tell stories and the way stories get conflated and exaggerated over time, you're right, 50, 100 years, and they've got a statue built to the Picard.
Dude, we're like 7 years away from worshiping Shatner. I mean, come on.
Yeah, some of us maybe sooner than that.
Already, yeah, who knows?
I found it very amusing. We start the show, 4.2 gigawatts of power. What do we want with that? And then thank goodness Geordi is there to pose that question, which leads directly into story exposition.
And there are only 3 things that you can do with that much power?
I know, right?
Minor phaser bank. I can't remember what the second one was. And the third one, Geordi.
And he just happens to come to the bridge to get that bit of information.
Well, yeah. That's nitpicky, though. And I got a bigger nit to pick. So big that we might actually say this is not a nit, but maybe a tick or something larger that you would want to pick.
You pick that nit.
Sounds weird when you say it that way. The Proto-Vulcans. So they're saying, they're logical and peaceful because, which makes sense because they've evolved sort of like the Vulcans did. Right. In their early existence, these guys should be like Romulan, basically, right? These guys should be passionate. Yeah. They should be angry. They should be hitting things, because that's what the Vulcans were before the Vulcan Romulan split. By the way, that's the worst thing at Baskin Robbins, the Vulcan Romulan split.
Oh,
I know you'll be tempted.
Yeah,
but just don't.
Yeah, I was kind of put off by the idea at the beginning that it's a proto-Vulcan, because I kept thinking parallel Earth. This is Miri again, only, a couple thousand years before, where you've got people who look and act just like these other people that we know, but have no relation to them that we know of.
Well, their evolution was so similar, and they've apparently already had the Vulcan Romulan split. I mean, it's I'm just, if we're going to liken them, then why don't we liken them more closely? And if we're not going to liken them, why don't we not liken them? I mean, they could be another logical race that's not. Although it does raise a question, should we come back to whether the Overseer was another traveler like the Picard at one point? Should we do that? Maybe we do that next segment. I mean, maybe these proto-Vulcans could be like a Prometheus thing, right? Where somebody landed on the planet, seeded a few Vulcans, which sounds dirty as well. Planted a few Vulcans, let's say, not killed them. And then, maybe we should circle back to that if we think of it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
I do want to say that Liko's fall was a great stunt. Mm-hmm. That was a really, really nice looking stunt. And a shout out to Dr. Pulaski. Glad to hear that. I figured the downside is we still know how to erase minds, but the upside is apparently it just doesn't work. And I wonder if we should check it on Sarjenka.
I think Sarjenka was already in trouble anyway, though, because she has that rock that doesn't exist on their planet. She's already insane at that point. Right. I actually kind of felt like Crusher's hackles went up a tiny bit, though. Yeah, I'm familiar with Dr. Pulaski's technique. I was like, just a tiny bit of okay, I understand. There was another doctor here. Okay, Captain. I saw other captains while I was at Starfleet, by the way, in case you're wondering.
Yeah, nice. I usually hate it when the star of the show has to dress like somebody else. Like Kirk in the Enterprise incident, and I mentioned James Bond and You Only Live Twice, and this one works a little bit better, but it kind of feels a little weird when you see Riker and Troy, and I just stopped by Dr. Crusher and had surgical implants to make me look like a different species.
Wow.
This is a thing they just do. Like, hey, I know you're taking care of these other scientists who are on the verge of death, but if you could, do a little thing with the brow, a little thing with the ears, maybe tan, then
nice. Nice.
That.
Well, I mean, they did that in the original series as well, though, as you mentioned in the Enterprise incident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
it's the thing.
Yeah, we've had like 80 years of this at least.
If you go to Starfleet Medical, you have to learn that as well.
Yes, you can master, actually, in plastic surgery in the 24th century.
Mm-hmm. Always worth mentioning when somebody asks if you're a god, you say yes. I believe we've mentioned that before.
We may have, yeah.
In the Path of Mission Log. And, it's a kind of a cool thing. You just beam somebody up to see your rad spaceship. Picard did this in Justice, And I feel like he may do it again. Time will only tell. Maybe we'll get to see him do that. And I was also thinking, who's to say that this proto-Vulcan group, that their social evolution wouldn't have just gone totally differently anyway. Mm-hmm. They may have figured out religions and gods and gone a totally different way anyway. Because I kept thinking, like, well, maybe logic isn't a thing that you evolve into, but you actually have to work at. You have to educate yourself into. So I thought, what's a god among this group of people? Maybe they'll change, maybe they won't. And I'm kind of getting more and more concerned about what you posed earlier, that you give them 50 years and.
Well, they turned in 5 minutes. I mean, that's the thing. But we should probably leave that again to the next segment. Because we got stupid stuff to talk about first.
We do. What about Picard being willing to die?
Yeah.
Because he said he was willing to die for the Prime Directive. And I kept wondering, well, he does have an artificial heart. He's been through this. He can take it again. That's the thing that he's got that they don't know about.
Well, maybe, except I actually thought about a way long time ago for you and me, not quite as long for other people, Amok Time. I thought about Amok Time and sort of like how you said, so Bones kills Kirk, right? Lets him die there. And he's lucky that then they just release the body, because who knows what their actual rituals were after the fight.
Oh yeah, right.
So I mean, it is very lucky. Yeah. So even if Picard had died, like actually died, and the plan was, okay, well, Crusher will be able to save me because it's only going to be like it's an arrow in the heart. Who can't handle that? Yeah. What if they had been like, okay, now quick, cut off his head. Like we do every time somebody dies on our planet. Oh, wow, that's going to be, because that's going to be harder to fix. Maybe he's in the transporter buffer.
Yeah, right.
It's interesting though. So you say that you think he was willing to die for the Prime Directive, or maybe he was willing to die for Troy. It sounded to me like, and this should also be in the next segment, but here we are. It sounded to me like he was willing to die so that they wouldn't believe in a god, because he actually says to them, "Look, if I'm immortal, you can't kill me. But if you kill me, then there was no god, so kill me."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Troy's and also let her go.
Yeah, I kept thinking that. What do? Do they kill Picard? He just falls down dead, and then all eyes turn to Troy.
Wow, now we've really angered the Picard. We better kill her fast. Yeah.
Yeah. There's kind of a weird thing at the end here. So in the captain's log, right before the last scene, Picard says that LaForge has overseen dismantling of the observation post. So that's a thing. All right, that's LaForge's job, and he has done his job. Now, a few seconds later, Picard is standing on the planet with the Mintakans around, and he reveals the post of the Mintakans and says, "It's a place where we can watch you." So either Geordi was not good at his job, or by dismantling, they just mean they're going to leave it where it is and then turn the hologram duct blind back on. But everybody has seen this, and they've all had a conversation with the Picard. Right. And I'm sorry, but if I were an agrarian Bronze Age proto-Vulcan who was fascinated by reason and the natural world, you would not be able to keep me away from a duct-blinded Federation outpost that has computers and force fields and holograms.
After studying the proto-Vulcans, it is difficult to decide which was the greatest achievement of the original Vulcans, gaining insight into it, or getting rid of their mullets. And a thank you to a listener for that observation.
So we had the good fortune of interviewing Marina Sirtis a few weeks back as we record this. It may have been longer than that as you hear this. If you haven't heard it, though, go back and listen. One of the things that I found really fascinating, one of the things I found most revealing in that, we come into season 1 and there's been this burning love between Riker and Troy. And what Marina said on the interview was that the only thing that kept their relationship alive was the fact that she and Frakes kept playing it on the screen. It wasn't written in anymore. They weren't talking about it anymore. Now, in last week's show, The Survivors, Riker is keen immediately to the fact that there's something wrong with Troy. And the reason Riker's keen to that immediately is because he is sitting in the meeting just staring at her the whole time. All of which is to say, when you get these fun moments of them talking about sexuality, when you get these fun moments of them talking about relationships between men and women, it's just kind of an interesting thing to now have that bit of information that she brought to the supplemental as well. That said, they have an interesting discussion about proto-Vulcan sexuality.
They do. And I hate to just quote a bunch of dialogue, but every word of this is good.
Which one do you want to be? Wait, we should probably take it in 2 parts.
Oh, okay. I'll be Troy for this. Okay.
And a lot of people just want to bet. A lot of people lost a bet too. I'm sorry. Yep. Go ahead, please.
Here we go. Mintakan emotions are quite interesting. Like the Vulcans, they have highly ordered minds, very sensible people. For example, Mintakan women precede their mates. It's a signal to other women.
This man's taken, get your own?
Not precisely. More like, if you want his services, I'm the one you have to negotiate with.
What kind of services?
All kinds.
They are a sensible race.
Thank you.
And
scene.
Yeah. I mean, what's fun about that is, first of all, we're learning about the Mintakans, but also it's that Cary Grant and whoever thing that's going on. Their relationship, it is so funny to me that the writers actually weren't writing a relationship for them anymore, because when I think about it, it's always there, with the exception of something that's coming up in a later season, but we won't necessarily talk about that here or now.
Right.
It's always there. And the idea that occasionally a writer might give them a bit of, racy dialogue or a bit of suggestive dialogue. I mean, it really is just every now and then, just a little bit. It's amazing to me that is basically kept alive by... Okay, so we're all sitting here at this table. Spiner's looking down. Picard's looking down the table. And where's Riker? Oh, Riker's looking at Troy. Of course he is. He's in love with her, even if we're not going to let him be.
It's great dialogue for them.
Yeah.
But it's also really interesting philosophical stuff about the Mintakans.
Yes.
Because here's another thing on display in this episode: strong female characters. The Mintakans have women as equals and as leaders.
Yeah.
And that's really cool to see.
The person who's apparently going to be the chief scientist, at least of this part of their planet, is a teenage girl.
Yeah.
And she's already doing the job. And I don't know if it was that her mother did the job before her, or if it was just that her mother would be proud of her. But either way, there's a teenage kid, and it's very important to measure the sun. That was actually the one thing that was kind of confusing. And also, I wish she had paid. I felt like, they just told her, well, just do something with the sundial.
Right, just
because
turn
she's
it and
spinning stuff. And
look,
there's is that actually going to stay there? Okay, good. That's actually going to stay there. And
you're like, look, you did science. Yay.
Yeah. But I mean, honestly, you got to love the fact that, yes, their leader is a woman and their chief scientist, apparently, is a woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have this sort of very interesting take on sexuality. They've gotten over some of their hang-ups because apparently the women can just barter their men's sexuality.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure that we're going in a good direction at that point.
No, maybe not. Maybe not. Yeah.
But it is interesting that it evolved that way or developed that way.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's all there is to discuss about this episode.
That's it, right?
Might as well move along.
Very
to the
strange.
wrap-up.
There's nothing. There's no. It's one of those, like, if only there were a message.
Yeah. Okay. Can we start out by restating, I'm going to say, the rules of mission log?
No, see, I got to stop you right there. I would go ahead and say ordainments.
Oh, right. Yeah, the fish, the fish people.
Yeah. God love them.
So,
the Aquans.
Oh, maybe there are people who are new to mission log, or maybe there are people who kind of skip around with mission log, and maybe some people participate heavily in like Twitter and Facebook, and you and I both know we just got tremendous comments there, and it's kind of amazing that we do this show alone, but then shortly after it goes up, just all this feedback comes. But the feedback is what's worth discussing here. So, for those who are maybe new or who maybe don't know, and let me tell you my perspective on mission log. So our job is to watch Star Trek and see what we can pick up in terms of morals, meanings, messages, either intended or unintended. We're sort of trying to get into the heads of the writers, right? And then we get to discuss that. And we get to filter that through our own experiences and opinions, because we're the hosts, and this is an opinion show, and that's how it works. And it also works that we will inevitably hit topics that are unpleasant or uninteresting to some of our audience, but that's what Star Trek is all about, to have a discussion about ideas in an entertaining and thought-provoking manner. And what's the kind of world that Star Trek envisions, and does that work? And do we agree with it, or do we not agree with it? So, yeah, you may not agree with the ideas in the episode, and you may not agree with us, and that's cool. And you can write to us, because I know you will. Or you can start a podcast where you talk about the things that you want to talk about from your point of view. And I guess why I'm bringing all of this up is that what I've noticed, and I know that you've noticed it too, is that I feel like recently there have been some listeners who try to argue that certain topics should be off limits, or that we shouldn't bring our opinions into those topics. Whatever it may be. So we go back to the original series, and there are episodes about sex and race and drugs and the environment and all these things. And inevitably, we'll get the emails that we kind of joke about online. We'll say, I love Star Trek and I love Star Trek's message, but do you have to talk about this?
Right.
And the answer is yeah, we do have to talk about this, because A, it's part of Star Trek, and B, you and I look at Star Trek as, well, the whole reason we do Mission Log is based on the premise that Star Trek is important and it has important things to say.
Yes.
So if we're not treating it that way, then we're just watching spaceships and laser beams. So today's show seemed like an appropriate place to reiterate the ordainments.
Okay.
That's the way I look at the ordainments of Mission Log.
Yeah.
Is that, our opinions are out there for all, and we do this every week, and you absolutely may not agree, but that's cool. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't go there.
Fact of the matter, too, and I'm not going to say whether this is true this week or not. I mean, I guess it'll probably come out, and I don't think people will be surprised anyway. But the fact of the matter is, even if we find something in a show, it doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with it. Go back to, I don't know, Angel One or Code of Honor or whatever. I mean, there, you can look at things and say, okay, well, here's what they're saying. And do you agree? No, not necessarily. Or, maybe. That's really sort of superfluous. Now, obviously, I think we're going to be able to argue some things easier than others if we actually do sort of hang with them.
Yeah.
And And now we get to skip to the wrap-up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so where do you want to start?
All right, well, you had a question about the Mintakans.
Oh, sure. Start with me. Start with me. Why not? So where are they? We said that the Bronze Age, right? They'd be sort of equivalent to the Bronze Age. Right. Unless Wikipedia has lied to me, and it never, ever, ever has lied to anyone ever. The Bronze Age is considered to have run someplace from about 3000 BC to maybe 1200 BC, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's something interesting about the fact that 21st century writers, or 20th century writers, excuse me, although I assume some have survived to the 21st, it was the 20th when they were writing it. And basically saying, look, we're done with the whole God thing like 5,000 years ago, or we should be. Because look at these guys. They're like they would be like the equivalent of our 5,000 years ago. And they're like, yeah, we used to believe in like a deity, but we don't believe in ghosts. We don't believe in astrology. And those are both things that they mention. They don't say them by name. They say, we no longer believe that we're haunted by the dead, nor that the stars guide our destination, or the stars guide our lives, or whatever it is.
Right.
So it's kind of great to begin the episode by saying, look, this ought to be so a thing in the past. And we're going to talk about how scary it could be if you go ahead and let that, run your life today. But really, we should be done with this between 3,500 and 5,000 years ago.
Right. Well, I'll give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt to say that these are proto-Vulcans, and we hold up Vulcans as just having wicked good logic. Mm-hmm. So they would have logicked their way out of this before humans would have. They would have logicked their way out of religion before humans would have. But
everybody on Star Trek is a stand-in for humans.
Yeah.
I mean, they're a stand-in for aspects of humans. So, I mean, you can say, well, the Vulcans would have done this. And then I have to say, well, have you seen a Vulcan? Do you know what a Vulcan would have done? More to the point, do you know how to please a Vulcan? And that, God, it keeps sounding dirty. And I don't mean for it to. I'm just sorry about that.
Yeah. There's a little bit of interesting thing here about the Hawthorne effect, the observer, not the physics observer effect when you talk about quantum physics and all, but the Hawthorne effect that in anthropology, just by being there, just by observing, you are changing the outcome of a situation. I thought that was pretty interesting. I liked anthropology when I studied that in college, not enough of it. But I always thought that was a fascinating idea, that you can never truly understand what's happening in the thing that you're observing because you're immediately tainting it.
Well, that's the whole point of the duck blind, though, right? I mean, they thought they had a technology that would allow them to avoid the Hawthorne effect, as you said.
And it's cool that even that far in the future, we're still doing this, that we are still studying other groups, and we're still trying to be that conscientious about, having a duck blind and all. But still, they had to get there. They had to build it. They've got a radio for supplies. The chances of this getting screwed up are still pretty high. They're doing everything they can. I agree.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I actually had a hard time believing that Baron would suddenly drop all of his anthropological ways.
Yeah.
He's like, look, we got to go, we got to get our guy. And Picard's like, we can't just go down there and get our guy. He's like, sure we can. They've already seen us. Damage done. Go get my guy. I was really surprised that he was not more. I think Picard actually said, look, we all signed a piece of paper. We all knew the risks. Sometimes it's bad. And we're going to deal with that. And he's like, no, but these are my people. That's good for your people and other people, but not mine.
Right.
Says the guy who has dedicated his life to, shh, don't let them see us.
Yeah, they do have a bit of a back and forth about the Prime Directive. And this is a good look at the Prime Directive. Picard kicking it off by saying, then why didn't you let him die?
I know, right? Brutal.
Yeah.
Reminded me of my old pal LQ Sonny Clemens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you? They were already dead. Just leave them dead. And well, he was gonna be dead. Just he's not at all well.
But this thread of further contamination must be prevented, and it's constant throughout the thing. And I thought the Prime Directive is an extremely interesting background to the story, but I don't necessarily see the Prime Directive as the point of the story, because point of the story is something else, But yeah, the Prime Directive is a thing, and we talk about it as living up to a moral code. In this, it is specifically about, well, don't interfere, and I guess if you have interfered, you have to undo the interference. You have to do the hard work to backtrack out of that. They keep saying throughout that the Prime Directive has already been violated. So at a certain point, it's like, well, really, what further damage could be done here? But I feel like maybe the story isn't about how far should we go to uphold that. It's interesting that Picard is there and puts his life on the line. But then you and I also have that question, is that really for Troy? Is that the captain just saying, I'm going to put myself in this position because my ultimate duty is the health and safety and well-being of my crew. So I will be the guy who steps in so that she can get out. Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, there are a few different reasons for him to do that. I mean, certainly there is keeping the Prime Directive intact. There is the whole thing about stopping them from believing in a deity, because I think he says that leads to, or maybe it was Baron who started talking about all the things that could lead to. Did he even say holy war? I can't remember.
He did. Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know what he was standing there for. Although it's another great character study that he stands there. I mean, there are any number of reasons for him to, and the best part is he didn't he didn't beam down with a breastplate.
Right.
He didn't beam down with he didn't hologram himself in. I mean, he's putting himself on the line, which is this totally awesome trait that he exhibits.
Interesting that things get kicked off with a near-death experience. I'm kind of fascinated that that's still a thing. That some people will have this change with a near-death experience, and even the terminology is a little wonky, near-death. But that is the thing that kicks off this story and kicks off the change in Liko. Now, they wouldn't know because they are Bronze Age after all, but they wouldn't know that is a thing, that they can misinterpret. And that is a constant thing throughout this episode, that misinterpretation of data and experience leads to false belief. Liko, who uses anecdote and personal experience as fact. Now, what's interesting is they are facts. The fact is that Liko was hurt. The fact is that Liko was beamed up and he met a guy named Picard. He saw a guy named Picard. And the fact is that he was repaired and sent back. But the interesting part of that is how deeply they misinterpret all of that information, because they don't have a point of reference for any of that. So the Mintakans are making this logical mistake early on. They are using every piece of evidence they find to match the hypothesis they already have, or rather than trying to disprove it. So even Nuria gets in on this act. She says to, did you say it to Riker? Yeah, she says to Riker, she says, well, all evidence says that there is a Picard. And all evidence says that this is happening. Well, yeah, it does actually lead to that. But the problem is they haven't then done the logical work to take a step back and say, okay, we have things that we will call evidence. And we have this hypothesis that Picard is a god and that Picard has all these powers. But what we haven't done is taken the evidence a step further to say, well, does it lead to any other hypothesis? Does it actually, have we done ourselves a disservice by stopping at our single hypothesis rather than seeing what else fits that model? So it's kind of cool. As much as I'm weird about them being proto-Vulcans, and we could talk about what a proto-Vulcan would actually be, it is kind of interesting then that you take a hyper-logical set of people and then let them make these mistakes that sound sciencey on top, take evidence, compare the evidence to what's going on, and then see if that fits the hypothesis or not, but let them make a common mistake. Because we all make that mistake. We think we've figured it out. We say, oh, look, the evidence fits my belief on this thing. But then we don't take it a step further and say, could the evidence actually mean something else that I have then locked myself into my original hypothesis that I won't let myself get backed out of.
Well, it's like we talked about last week with Kevin and the nearness of the tragedy in his life. There's a lot going on for Liko. Death is a very close thing to him in a couple of ways. He just lost his wife in last year's floods, right? And then the other thing, of course, was he just nearly died himself. And he was transported to another place where he was magically healed, and he heard people who looked very different than him. One guy who was obviously in control. I mean, he's got evidence for everything. It's just he's wrong about what that is. But it all happens in about 25 minutes.
Sure.
And one assumes that he's actually... logic may be a little threadbare at this point because he's obviously still suffering from the loss of his wife. And he's sort of grasping at wanting things to be the way that they were. And so then he'll turn to something that... on his most logical day, would not be something he would necessarily turn to, but he's longing, he's hoping, he then sees signs, and then everything that he says is true ends up being proven by other things happening when they find Palmer. I mean, that's it, right? He's got this crazy story, and Picard's looking for the Palmer, or the Picard's looking for Palmer. Right. And all of a sudden, oh, there's Palmer. Okay, well, that fits. Everything else must fit, too. Right. I will say the part that bothered me was how quickly the Matakans and we, honestly, revert almost instantly to the idea of an angry god. Mm-hmm. We do angry god really quickly. I mean, cities are wiped off the map for a certain reason, and it's because we allowed that guy to marry that guy that now all of a sudden we've got this storm going on someplace else. Right. But this idea that. And even when Picard is standing there being nice, Nuria assumes that she has angered or upset him. She's like, oh, wow, this all makes sense. It's very logical. That's totally cool. By the way, can you bring back the dead for me, please? And he's like, well, no, I can't. And she's like, oh, it's because I made you angry. Well, no, it's because I can't. And I'm sort of, it's kind of mind-blowing with how quickly we will go to that idea. That's I would love to know why. Unless it's just Old Testament stuff. But, I mean, it can't just be that. I mean, we automatically sort of seem to assume that, oh, no, God's going to be really upset with me.
Yeah, but we still do it. It's the 21st century as of the recording of this podcast, and we still do it, and our race has done it for thousands of years.
Yes.
I mean, it's maybe a peek into that in Liko's psychology, that... like you said, he's kind of been through the ringer. Mm-hmm. We know he's harboring this pain about the loss of his wife, and then he just went through this very traumatic experience with falling, and now his whole world is turned upside down. Yeah. And there is no way for him to explain that because, like I said, there is no point of reference, and he hasn't had the time to logic his way out of it, so he has logicked his way into... well, this is beyond me, therefore it's insert spiritual description here,
Yeah. The other thing that's very, I mean, it's kind of, and again, we're only giving it maybe 45 minutes, right? That's how long the show is. I would say maybe it lasted a day in terms of in-universe time. There was a line that kind of bummed me out. Troy says, that's the problem with believing in a supernatural being determining what he wants. And Liko says, we must do something. Mm-hmm. Why? I mean, and you'll say to people on this planet, we must do something. And then it depends on what you're talking about. There's bad storms, we must do something. And some people say, well, okay, let's reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and let's build bulwarks and make sure, and blah, blah, blah. And other people are like, no, we have to pray.
Right.
And, I really don't understand how that ends up being a divide. I don't think it's like, either we take precautions or we pray. If you're a praying person, maybe you go ahead and take precautions as well. And if you're a precautions person who finds yourself thinking, maybe I wonder, if you want to meditate, if you want to pray, do whatever you want to do there, that's fine too. It's not necessarily an either or thing. It was amazing, though, that, there's lightning. We got to do something. And it's, well... Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he's freaked out by that, even though they've had lightning before. And,
yes, but not like this lightning, John. Not like this lightning. Yeah, plus he's got the bow, he's got the arrow, he's got the hostage,
But isn't that interesting, then, how even the regular data, the regular experience that they've gone through before, many, many times before, then suddenly takes on a brand new meaning when his interpretation of the world changes. Now everything is part of the angry god or the happy god.
Yeah. You're a giant Vulcan. I know that never happens to you. It still happens to me. I'm thinking about something and suddenly a song comes on the radio, and no, I don't think, oh, angry God's angry and he's sending me a song. I think, wow, that's so weird that song would play right now. Well, okay, only because you noticed it, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm enough of a romantic. I'm enough of a, whatever, that I would like to think, oh, wow, I needed to hear that song right then, and that song came on, and that must mean something. Well, it means you got something out of the song. Move on.
See,
Ken, if that is in fact your name.
No, but I think that's fine, and I think that's really cool. And as much as I try to be a little more logical, more Vulcan in my outlook, fine. There's something about the poetry of being an emotional being, of being a human being, that we can look at things like that and go back in our heads to a time or a situation or a place where, say, that song really meant something. And we remember those positive hits. That's great.
Yeah.
We should be doing that. The problem is when we ascribe it to then a higher power that has control over our lives, like these people do. And then, like Deanna said, that you can't interpret. That's the problem with believing in a supernatural being, trying to determine what he wants. Well, does the song mean something good or does it mean something bad? Well, no, it just means that you interpreted that. It means that you heard that song and it meant something. You forgot every time you heard a song that meant nothing to you.
Is it Sirens of Titan? Winston Niles Rumford believes in God, but it's the Church of God the Totally Indifferent. So, yeah, there's a God, but he really doesn't care what you do.
Right. Doesn't care what song is on the radio.
And you don't need to concern yourself with him, right, at that point. So, like, okay, yeah, so we have creation, and yeah, go ahead. That's thanks to a God. But, he created, and now he's moved on, and maybe you should, too, seems to be the idea. That's Kurt Vonnegut, though. Everybody knows he was a Satan-kissing novelist, so...
Right. So the Picard can grant anything. Gentle winters, plentiful hunting, even bring back the dead, and there's none too subtle religious reference through all of that. And it's also kind of fun and interesting how the interpretation of Picard's wishes and wants jump around the more the Mintakans talk about him. So it's this giant game of telephone that is a very interesting parallel to the evolution of religions. They can logic their way into anything they want to believe about him. Oh, this is happening, it means he's angry. This is happening, it means he's happy. We don't really know what this means, but I'll make a pretty good case as to why we have to, resort to sacrifice with Troy.
That escalates quickly, doesn't it?
It does, and that is kind of the weird thing about this episode. The whole course of events takes place within a couple of days, we assume.
Yeah.
So they're logical, they find religion, they lose religion, whatever. Yeah, I mean, maybe this should play out over a century, but hey,
that's why I said time. 50 to 100 years, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Check back with them then. Just land the shuttle near the giant statue of Picard.
Right. But it's a good look at how we develop religions and then develop every offshoot sect and cult that branches off from those religions. So it really is all about the interpretation. Come back in 50 or 100 years and you've got the Liko followers and you've got the Nuri followers, and they do not like each other at all because their version of Picard tells them something very different about what to do when thunder comes. And we even, we see that development of a really dark side of interpreting religion when Liko is ready to harm Troy to please the Picard. You mentioned it, and here's the line that Barron says: without guidance, that religion could degenerate into inquisitions, holy wars, chaos. So that is exactly what has happened. Now it degenerates in 10 minutes.
Well, it has to, because it's parable, right? I mean, they have 48 minutes to tell us the story, and it has to happen in the lifespan of our characters as well.
Yeah.
Unless it was some special, mind probe thing that suddenly let them live life in like a 45-minute setting or something. But
right.
I mean, it's got to go that quickly. And well, we don't want to talk about whether it detracts or adds to yet. Yeah. But I mean, it's got to go as fast as it goes. At least we can sort of logic our way into how he can logic himself out of, fairly quickly to go, yeah, he lost his wife and he just died and he came back to life and he was on a spaceship and it was a whole thing and his daughter saw it and there's the other guy. That might make things escalate quickly.
Yeah. Well, and there is something, like I said before, that I think is very realistic about that, that very often when you talk to people who have had a spiritual change, mm-hmm. there's something that happened. And it may not just be a sudden thing. It may not just be like Liko, where he's been hurting from this tragic loss. But I remember years ago interviewing a friend of mine who had very deeply given himself to his religion. And I thought that was fascinating. And he had described this time in his life when things were going horribly, mm-hmm. where he felt like he didn't have direction and he was making bad choices and bad decisions, physically, personally, all of this. And then he sort of had a moment where he decided, all these things that I'm doing are wrong. Therefore, I've now had a spiritual awakening, and now my life will be dedicated to this other thing. And in talking to him, I said, well, that's fascinating. Now, do you chalk that up to a higher power doing this to you? Or do you chalk that up to, well, I was in a bad spot, and I realized that I needed to get myself out of it? His interpretation is a higher power reached out to me and made me do that. And I said, okay, well, do you think there's any credence to just sort of the present psychological need to not be the person that you were unhappy with? And he said, yeah, I see that, but I believe that something else happened. So I kind of get it. I in some way, I think we can all relate to where Liko is coming from. Like I said, he makes this interesting logical mistake, and he's so good at logic, he can just keep working his way deeper and deeper.
It is a terrible, terrible shame when an episode of Star Trek is so light and fluffy.
Who's got two thumbs and watches? Who watches the Watchers? This guy. And in case you didn't pick up on it, I'm actually pointing my two thumbs at me and saying,
cool.
This guy. Yeah. 4 if you count John thumbs, but it's this guy's.
Yeah, I'm not pointing at you with my thumbs.
I can't control him. I don't know whether he's pointing his thumbs at himself or not when I say that. That's why I can only speak for myself, I guess is what I'm saying. We have a question, though.
Yep.
Messages, morals, meanings. Does the whole thing hold up? These are actually the questions that we try to tackle in this part of the show. Who watches the Watchers, John? Does this episode hold up?
Well, aside from the whole religious history of a planet or a community being condensed down into 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. So if we can swallow that, I would say that, it's paced pretty well. There's a nice contrast between the location, Hello Vasquez Rocks, and the Enterprise. It's a lot of cat and mouse with heavy ideas. A lot happens in 45 minutes. There's a lot of plot, and it all works together very well. So, we've talked about how the original series took on big topics. They did their racism episode, their equality episodes, their religion episodes. And now Next Gen has done kind of the same thing. They've done their drug addiction episode, their civil rights episodes, their attempts at taking on sexism. And here's the religion episode in the tradition of Who Mourns for Adonais. Not only does it feel like Star Trek, to me it feels like Gene Roddenberry all over the page. It feels like Gene reaching through the TV and grabbing us by our lapels and telling us exactly who we are and what our values are in the 24th century. So as a story, as a piece of entertainment, and more importantly to us as a slice of Star Trek, unequivocally, yes, I feel like it holds up. How about you?
I'll say really quickly, I mean, it holds up better than Who Mourns for What's His Name, because they don't cop out.
Yep.
And maybe that's because there's no network to whom they have to answer. But, and the whole thing about one has sufficed.
Yeah.
We find that one suffices. The fact that they're like, now we're even cool without the one, now that you mentioned it.
Yeah.
There's one thing that we didn't mention in the last segment, but it is one of the things that helps this episode hold up, and it's not message-wise. It's although it is message-wise as well. Picard walking Nuria through how it is that he's not a god is just a wonderful, wonderful scene. It's just, I mean, honestly, it's just it's a great. It feels like Logic 101.
Yeah.
Like, so you live in a hut. Yeah. You used to live in caves. Yeah. Why don't you live in caves now? Well, these are better. So how'd you end up with the hut? Somebody thought of it, right? Well, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So how do you think I got into a spaceship? I mean, it really, it was well played. It was well done. I will tell you that the first time I was watching this episode for our show today, I was actually cooking dinner, and I stopped because it was wonderful. I mean, that exchange, that look, taking, Nuria by the hand and thus the writers and Gene Roddenberry, as you say, taking the viewer by the hand and saying, look, here's how you get from where you are right now to where we're wanting to go.
Yeah.
And it's building on, not on superstition, not on unfounded belief, but on, hey, this car could probably go 5 miles per hour faster. Let's work on that. No, we could probably fly now, and so let's work on that. And hey, we could probably go further in space than we did before. Let's work on that. You know what I mean? I mean, it's sort of it's a wonderfully hopeful message. It's also interesting that, they actually did know where they were at this point. So you can go ahead and tell people all those hopeful things, and they'll turn around and go, yeah, by the way, can you make the floods not come this year? Or, oh, by the way, can you bring back the dead? I mean, so even if you're taking a point where you go, okay, so you get it. And you're like, yes, I do get it. And I'm going to go tell my priest, and he's going to tell everybody, oh, well, no, I guess maybe not. Let's start again. Did you live in a cave? Okay. But that part I thought was absolutely fantastic.
It's interesting that when I mentioned Who Mourns, and you said, well, yeah, they had that cop-out, that one line that kind of cops out. And I feel like, yeah, one line sort of derailed it, and it's too bad that line is there. But overall, I feel like that episode did a great job of posing the question. And it's so funny that, I, like you, I love that scene so much with Picard grabbing Nuri's hand, because it reminded me of Kirk's conversation with Lieutenant Palamas in Who Mourns. Now, a little bit different context, because she's not confused about, who's a god, what's a god, whatever, but she's fallen for Apollo.
Right.
And Kirk says, give me your hand. Now feel that. Human flesh against human flesh. We're the same. We share the same history, the same heritage, the same lives. We're tied together beyond any untying. Man or woman makes no difference. We're human. We couldn't escape from each other even if we wanted to. And it goes on from there. But it reminded me of that moment because I thought, again, it was such a great... there are these nice little intimate scenes between characters in Star Trek, but then they speak to a much bigger sort of philosophical outlook, and that's one of those moments for me. So to me, those two things parallel each other very nicely.
All right, so messages.
Yeah. Well,
I turned to my wife after we watched this episode and I said, so basically this is Star Trek saying there's no God.
Well, I think it's a little more nuanced than that, but...
Really?
Yeah. Well, because here's why. I mean, first of all, I would say we've used this line before. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So that's not necessarily the message here, but it is the idea expressed here. It is that we can't allow ourselves to be influenced by magic, because sometimes it's just technology.
Yeah, I actually, yes, that is something that Nuria and her people have to learn. But if this show is going to bring any message to us, then I think we actually have to leave that one off the table. I mean, that would be true if you were, one of those tribes in South America that's never actually met a person and that we've actually never seen until suddenly we're flying over them one day going, hey, who are those guys? Should we stop and say hi? Right. I mean, I get what you're saying, but we don't have... We had said that we might talk about whether the Overseer was actually somebody that had visited the Matakans in the past. We don't know anything about the Overseer. We don't know if that's just a made-up idea of a god or if that was actually some guy that was there thousands of years ago who, made them proto-Vulcans as opposed to proto-Romulans. We don't know anything about that Overseer. Here on Earth, I mean, I know you hate Chariot of the Gods.
Yep.
Because you hate the idea that we couldn't have come up with this stuff without intervention from aliens. It would be so much easier if we had intervention from aliens. It would be so much easier and better if we had an intervention from aliens, because at least then we would have an answer. And
easier, I'm not going to say better, though.
There'd be fewer wars. There'd be less. I mean, if there were aliens and we were visited by them every now and then, there'd be less interpretation. We wouldn't necessarily have to say, well, that's the problem with believing in a higher being. You don't necessarily know that what you're doing is what you want them to do. They were showing up every 10 years going, what is that? Stop it. Knock it off. Knock it off. So, I mean, maybe it wouldn't be better. Okay, but my point is, I mean, out here on our own, right? Yeah. I mean, we're out here on our own. Let me back up and just say that part. So the sufficiently advanced technology thing, it doesn't feel like that could be a message for us here, because as far as we know, there are no aliens coming down. We got nothing to point to. There's thunder. Yeah. Oh, crap, there's thunder. I better make something up. You know what I mean? I mean, at least Liko sees Picard, and at least OG sees Liko like vanish and come back, right? They've at least they've got those kind of proof things, and then you can say, well, now they've got the any sufficiently advanced technology lesson that they have to learn. That doesn't apply to us, because I mean we're the ones who keep making nuclear reactors. We're the ones that keep sending ships to space. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're the ones who make the car go 5 miles per hour faster.
This the danger of the God of the gaps fallacy is throughout this. To say that anytime there's a gap in knowledge, and we just get to throw in, okay, well, we don't know what that thing is. We know what a bow and arrow is, and we know what thunder and lightning is, and we know what the caves are, but we don't know what this other thing is. We'll just insert God into that. We'll say that that's God.
And then a miracle happens.
Right.
If you don't want to say that the message of this episode of Star Trek is there's no God, I mean, if you want to, I don't want to say sugarcoat it, because it's not. I don't want to say that. Well, if you want to back off that message a little bit, I mean, do you think the actual message is don't be afraid?
I think it's don't be afraid, but I think it says that we're better off with logic and reason than we are with superstition. Now, take that to the logical extreme, and look, even as deep as my beliefs are, I'm not going to say there is no God, and there are no atheists who would say, well, not none, but very few who would say there is no God, because that's an unknowable thing.
Wait a minute. Okay? Wait a minute. You and I have talked about that in the past, and I've said that you can't know that, and you've said, well, I haven't seen anything, so I assume there's not. I thought the difference between atheism and agnosticism was atheists are like, nope, no God. And agnostics are like, I don't know.
No. Well, I mean, we might get off on too far of a different discussion here.
Right.
But it's a discussion worth having. No, I mean, agnosticism is about knowledge, knowing for a fact there is or is not something factually based, okay? Atheism is simply about belief and practice. Do you believe or do you not believe? So this show isn't necessarily saying, a hard atheist stance to say there is no God. I don't think it necessarily has to say that. But what it does say is that we're better off when we get rid of supernatural and superstitious beliefs. So, and here's an interesting thing. Now, I've seen arguments to the effect that this story isn't about religion per se, but it's more about the prime directive and about zealotry leading to violence. And yeah, okay, there's zealotry leading to violence in that. But the underlying concern of this episode by Picard and throughout is that it's a downward slope when we give up our rationality and replace it with superstition. So I've said it before and I'll say it again. Picard and the Enterprise crew kind of in this show is a proxy for us. They speak for us, to the enlightened human beings of the 20th century or 21st century with our heads in the 24th. So to Picard, it is an achievement, and he uses that word. It is an achievement that the Mintakans gave up their supernatural beliefs, and he won't let them slide backwards. Now, you mentioned, and we reiterated Baron's line about them devolving into holy war and inquisition and chaos, Picard's follow-up to that, I think, is the heart and soul and the core of this episode. Because Picard's response to that, he says, horrifying. Dr. Baron, your report describes how rational these people are. Millennia ago, they abandoned their belief in the supernatural. Now you're asking me to sabotage that achievement, to send them back into the dark ages of superstition and ignorance and fear? No. Although he says it much more dramatically than I just did. But, so that is the heart. That is the message of this episode. Is that we as a race sort of have to pull ourselves out of ancient and superstitious and supernatural beliefs that keep holding us back, that we will be better when we draw ourselves away from that and realize that the natural world is a thing that is there, that's not to be feared, that we can have great achievements. But when we keep relying and misinterpreting things like, well, the angry God is making it rain, then we take a step backward.
And I assume that you would say that message holds up.
That message speaks to me, Ken.
Right.
Yeah. I think this is a great episode with a powerful message, and I do think that, again, when we start to paint Star Trek with the really broad strokes about what does it mean and what is it trying to tell us, the audience, yeah, that's one of those big pillars of what is underlying Star Trek. I think throughout the shows, they don't always talk about it. They don't always have to talk about it because there are other stories to be told. But this is one of those principles that we see within the whole Star Trek universe.
You can do it. I mean, that really, honestly, that is kind of like you boil down the message. It's you can do it.
Yeah, and you personally can do it.
Yeah.
And you as a human race can do it. And you don't need to worry about the mighty hand that will reach down and either, please or punish based on its whim.
Why am I always the one who says there's no God? Why am I always the one who says there's no God? Because I don't even know. But I'm always the one who says it.
Yeah, but look, I mean, that's... I guess that's why I come back to my own personal position. Yeah, I live my life as if there is no God.
Right.
I don't practice, I don't pray, I don't do any of that. But I still know that I don't know. Because if conditions change tomorrow, and if God showed up at Hollywood and Vine and said, I'm God, I'm going to give you all the proof in the world to prove to you that I'm God. Okay, well, then I need to reconsider my position, So, but that's okay. That's keeping an open and skeptical mind. But if I would just go around saying, there is no God, and I have proof to that effect, well, I don't, because I can't prove a negative.
Yeah. Well, you said that you'd said it before and you'd say it again, and I got to say I've said it before, and I'll say it again as well. Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. Executive producer Rod Roddenberry. You can find out more at roddenberry.com. For more exciting Star Trek podcasts, be sure to check out Trek FM. That is trek.fm, and you'll find that online. And for the latest in Star Trek news and discussion, be sure to visit trekmovie.com.
Next weekend, The Bonding.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com, and from the album Messages by Key Theory, free to download at kitheory.com. The Proto-Vulcans should have known that Picard was not God. After all, what would God need with a starship? and transmission.